John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States, who served, elected in 1960, served as president from 1961 to 1963. January 20th, 1961, took office, and his presidency came to a very tragic end on November 22nd, 1963, which we, who are followers of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Kennedy devotees, if you will, refer to November 22nd as that lone, dark day in Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas being the site of the tragic assassination of the president. As of the reflection on President Kennedy, my own particular favorite quote of his, and there are many quotes attributed to him, my own favorite quote of his: "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." He said those words in his inaugural address to the American people on January 20th, 1961, after he took office as 35th president. What he was saying in those words, "ask not," was he was calling upon a new generation of Americans. He was summoning them to a new call and a higher call of leadership and of service. Service to one another, service to neighbor, service to community, service to the country, and service to the world. He was challenging a whole new generation of Americans to look within themselves and identify what their talents were, and to determine ways in which they could make those talents come to realization and to contribute to the betterment of society. Now, the reason why President Kennedy was looking to the young people of his day was because, and let's keep the historical aspect here, is because President Kennedy was a very young person when he became president. He was mid-30s, and he was taking office following 8 years of an elder person who had been president, Dwight Eisenhower. And so the Kennedy administration, the presidency of John F. Kennedy, was really not only a transition from one political party to another, Republican to Democrat, but it was also a transition from one generation, an older generation, to another generation, younger generation. So President Kennedy's appeal, his appeal, was to a younger generation of Americans, for them to hear the call for leadership and to hear the call to service. And he introduced many new innovative ideas and programs. He established the Peace Corps, which to this day still exists. It is an international service organization. It looks for and cultivates young people to, young Americans that is, to go into other countries and to work amongst the poor people, help them medically, help them with their education, be mentors to them, be tutors to them, and to lift them up and to try to help them see a better way of life for themselves. So President Kennedy had initiated the Peace Corps, which is remaining in existence to this day. President Kennedy had also dreamed of the space program. It was his dream to have a man land on the moon before the close of the 1960s decade. Unfortunately, the president did not live to see that dream come to realization, as he himself faced a very untimely death in 1963. The realization of the landing by a man on the moon occurred in July 1969 under President Richard Nixon, who happened to be Republican. Interestingly, in 1960, then Senator Kennedy from Massachusetts and then Vice President Richard Nixon were political opponents. They were each running for President of the United States. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president and was seeking election to the presidency. He would later be elected president in 1968. And so Kennedy and Nixon, interestingly, the dream of Kennedy came to fruition under the presidency of Richard Nixon. That's just providence. That wasn't planned that way. That's just providence. John F. Kennedy came from a very large Irish family. His father came to this country from Ireland, made his home in Massachusetts. President Kennedy's own mother, her father was the mayor of Boston back in the day. The president has several brothers and sisters, and all of them went into some of them went into public service. Ted Kennedy, public service. Bobby Kennedy, public service. Jean Kennedy Smith, who was the only surviving daughter, was an ambassador to Ireland under President Clinton, and so forth and so on. And President Kennedy himself was about bringing peace into the world. There was the threat of nuclear annihilation from the Soviet Union. He faced the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the planting of nuclear missiles in Cuba by Russia. He challenged Russia to remove those missiles. He was able to negotiate with Nikita Khrushchev in not having any one missile fired. So President Kennedy, to his credit, was able single-handedly to negotiate with Khrushchev and his brother Bobby Kennedy, who would later be Attorney General and run for president himself, United States Senator. President Kennedy, to his credit, prevented nuclear annihilation.
Do you feel like he was in the protection?
That he was in what?
Leading us in the right way.
Do I feel that he was leading us the right way? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Again, his call to younger people for community service, his face down with Nikita Khrushchev in preventing a nuclear war, his establishment of the Peace Corps, challenging young people to get more involved in helping people in poor countries. His dream of landing a man on the moon. And with the space program, we see all of the more modern technologies of today, whatever they might be, media, computers, all of the digital equipment that we use today, that all came as a result of President Kennedy's dream from the space program. He believed in the power of negotiation. He was very resolute in welcoming his opponents to the negotiating table. He was very resolute in finding solutions through negotiations. Another one of his quotes there, let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Again, let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate.
Yeah.
And again, and he brought, with really the great help of his wife, Madam First Lady Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, they brought the arts back to the White House. They brought artists and entertainers worldwide to the White House to entertain and to perform. President Kennedy was a very charismatic individual. He made a lot of trips to foreign countries. He was the first, and this is important, he was the first president of the United States who was a Roman Catholic. Now, he also made it very clear when he was running for president in 1960 that he was not the Catholic candidate for president. He made it very clear that he was a candidate for president who happened to be Catholic. He believed in the separation of church and state. He was proud of his Catholic religion. He was...
I want to call us in.
Okay.
And I won't answer it, but I'm gonna edit this out too. I want to see where this episode could go to.
Okay.
But finish.
He was very clear in his belief in the separation of church and state. And again, he believed that he happened to be a Catholic who was a candidate for president. And he also made it clear that if he became president, which he did, that he would not he would not be submissive to any rules or orders from the Vatican. He made it very clear to the church and to the American people that if he became president, his primary responsibility was to serve as president of the United States and not face interference. He would be open to guidance by the Catholic Church, but he would not be allowing himself to be taken by the church authorities in running the country. Mm-hmm. And so...
Well, it's close.
Yes. And so...
we're going to start a new one, too.
As we... here we are now, 55 years post, since the tragic assassination in Dallas, Texas. It is important, I believe, to build on the legacy of John F. Kennedy in terms of his dreams for a new generation, which even for today's millennials, to look to themselves, identify their talents, and to see where they can ask what they can do for their country. Just as John F. Kennedy had asked a new generation in 1961, what can you do for your country? I would submit that the message and the words of John F. Kennedy in asking a generation of what they can do for their country appeals to the new millennials of today. Ask what you can do for your country and build on that legacy and build on that leadership development and let us continue to make Kennedy's dream come fully alive.
Beautiful.